Moving along to our last speakers of the day, of the session, actually. We have two presenters who will be co-presenting. We have Peter Bosscha as well as Peter Brierley from Akacia Medical. So both of them will be presenting on their innovation of a Bilevel positive airway pressure non-invasive ventilator. So I will start with Peter Bosscha from the CSIR, who is introducing him. He is a research group leader in the industrial robotics here at CSIR. He directed the engineering team behind the CSIR ventilator system that made headlines in 2020 when it provided a local solution for patients with respiratory distress due to COVID-19. Peter holds an MSc in mechatronics from the University of KZN and has several publications to his name and inventions sold in local and international markets. His focus is on product development and conducting research and development in industrial automation, new platforms and algorithms for robot control and application of machine techniques. So now I will just also briefly introduce the other Peter B. I'll call him Peter B. Peter is the general manager of Akacia Medical Pty Ltd, which is a company that was a CSIR partner in the development of the ventilator system in 2020. Starting his career as an officer in the Navy, Peter joined Unilever as an engineer in 1980 and later moved to ad hoc Ingram Laboratories, which is part of Tiger Brands, first as a project manager and eventually as a logistic executive. As a manufacturing executive at the confectionery division, he was closely involved in manufacturing and engineering operations. After 12 years at Tiger Brands, Peter started a consultancy, a business running a varied portfolio of projects ranging from construction and logistics to sales optimization and information technology. Peter is a firm supporter of local product and process development and localization of manufacturing as fundamental drivers of employment. So Peter, this stage is yours.
Great. So we've got a dual challenge here. This is the Peter squared show, if you will. Both of us want to talk, which means we're going to fight about time. And we're also in between you and the lunch. So we'll see how far we get. So the reason why we're doing this as a dual presentation is it's all very well CSR people presenting. We just thought it would be really useful to get some industry perspectives as well on what we do and see how well we match and all that sort of stuff. Cool. So just quickly so that you know where I'm at or we're at, some acknowledgement. I'm going to do some free advertising for the group that I'm in. Talk a little bit about ventilators in general, and then this Bilevel device, which is the core of this talk. So without too much ado, the acknowledgements. There's the National Ventilator Project, which was created when there was this huge need for ventilators in the country. And through that project, we learned so much. Before, we hadn't got a clue about what a ventilator is and how it works and all that stuff. We learned a lot through that whole process. It was a very intense time in our lives. And then DBSA, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, they have sponsored the development of the Bilevel ventilator, or B-Life as we call it. Right, CRFP. Basically, a whole bunch of engineers. So don't think too much scientists. Really a lot of mechatronics, so electronics people, mechanical people, software people, you name it. All of them really interested in getting stuff out there in the market. So impact is really what drives us. We do a lot of product development in all kinds of different spheres, customized robotics, and then we also have got this learning factory set up, which is basically a teaching academy for our technologies and stuff like that. We get very regular tours of lots of different people, so it's an interesting interaction with everyone. Another way of looking at it, pictures are big enough. So we've done some on-rail robotics, which is together with Transnet. We've done some vineyard inspection devices, robotics, together with Stellenbosch University. Do a lot of 4IR type stuff. We got some robot arms, so lots of interesting stuff. The thing that we're famous for lately is this CPAP ventilator that was developed during the pandemic. Full digital lifecycle management. So it basically talks about product lifecycle management. You capture all of the information that you're busy with into this one cohesive whole. In the end, what you're supposed to be able to do is even simulate the device on your own digital system and learn lessons, improvements, and feed that back to the product again. But anyway, it was early days for us at that stage. But anyway, this ventilator is 18,000 units that were manufactured and distributed. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And this is my favorite slide because there's always this, but what impact did it have? Well, there you go. Feedback from medical industry, of different hospitals, of people that really are enthusiastic about what the CSIR put together. My little favorite picture is this guy doing push-ups, just demonstrating that, see, I've recovered. And that was all thanks to this CPAP device. So it's something that the CSIR can be really proud of. We really saved lives. And a lot of people will sort of stand back, yeah, but why did we do it? And listen, didn't you jump on a bandwagon? Because there's a lot of naysayers, but we really made an impact. So it's something to be proud of. Right, ventilators, a background for the people that don't know. So CPAP is basically this device that keeps oxygen flowing into your lungs and tries to keep your lungs inflated a little bit. And the idea is that the lungs will then better accept oxygen. It'll help you with your illness. There's more oxygen in your blood, all that stuff. The Bilevel device, which is what we're going to talk about now, is something that is a bit more advanced. There's some electronics on board and all that stuff. And it basically inflates your lungs when you're breathing in, and it'll lower the pressure when you're breathing out. So it makes it a bit easier to breathe, and at the same time it assists you getting oxygen. There's a lot of advantages. I'll get to it just now. After CPAP and BiPAP, you got a problem, because then it becomes intubation and ICUs and stuff like that. And the problem with intubation is that it bypasses all of your immune system. So suddenly you haven't got a mucus layer anymore. Basically, there's air going in and out of your lungs directly. And something like that needs to be very carefully managed to make sure that the patient stays healthy, doesn't get any other infections. So if at all possible, doctors, medical personnel would like to stay with BiPAP or CPAP. Right. So strategic intent of the BeLive ventilator, it was really clear, and I can't stress this enough. When we started doing this ventilator stuff, it was really clear. Getting any assistance from overseas, very difficult. A lot of the traditional suppliers just put a block on anything that they supplied to South Africa. So we really need to create this market ourselves. And we found the weirdest of places to assist us. But it's really, there's a vulnerability in this country with medical technology that we need to address. Then, yeah, impact, you can read faster than I can talk. So basically, the localization of a BiPAP device was really seen as being very important. It's got several advantages over our CPAP device. So, advantages of the ventilator. So where a CPAP basically blows oxygen and uses at a very high rate oxygen and wastes a lot of that. The BiPAP has got much better control over that. It'll regulate flow and pressure and basically at a much lower oxygen flow if necessary. Depends on the patient. And then the alarming functions. So there's some onboard electronics, and when things go wrong, then it'll give a quick warning to the nurse or whoever is medical personnel. Something that doesn't happen with CPAP. So for instance, what you see is people aren't used to mask and they tear the mask off again. In the meantime, the nurses turn their back and they don't know what's going on. Or a hose gets disconnected or stuff like that. In all of those cases, the Bilevel will actually alarm. So that helps a lot. Then lots of other advantages. I think the key one is also this remote monitoring thing, so that we can have multiple of these devices in one central control place where you can observe multiple patients in one go, so you don't have to run around the whole time. Okay, a little bit of the engineering. I won't go into much depth. So this core, which is those, I think I got a pointer. I'm gonna hit the wrong buttons. CPAP is basically the same core as in the BiPAP itself. So this mixture of oxygen and air. We did some electronics development, mechanical development, you name it. All of this stuff happens in-house in the CSIR. The end result is this device, which we have created. It is, I'll get into that just now. Just a couple of challenges getting to this point is, you know, you're talking to medical personnel, you tell them what you want to do, and there's this massive culture clash between what an engineer does and what a medical personnel does. They just think differently. And it's really this translation the whole time. That's one challenge. The other thing is, I already said it, component availability is not just electronics, but it's anything medical. That's really a challenge. So you need to develop your local lines of support. And then the SAPRO approval process took quite a bit longer than we envisaged. For the CPAP, there's a lot of paperwork behind the scenes, but it went quicker, probably because it was a less complex device. This thing with electronics, onboard power source, you name it, is just a higher level of getting approvals in place. So it was quite a mission to get it done, but we got it right. So currently, where we're at, we've developed some prototypes. We have done all of the relevant testing. We've actually got SAPRO approval. So during the pandemic, you can actually put this thing in. Unfortunately, the pandemic is over. So we need to go to the next stage. Try and get into the commercial market, get this thing actually as a product out there. We've got a business plan. We found a partner that's willing to take on and produce things and actually get the thing into the market. So we want to get to full licensing. Another way of looking at it, the green bits is what we've done, and the blue stuff is where we want to get into. And Peter's going to talk a lot about all of those things. International certification, the situation with SAPRO has changed a little bit, and it happened recently. Up till very recently, you needed to have FDA or CE approval in order to actually introduce a medical product in this country. SAPRO has relaxed those rules for local produced equipment. So we've got a bit of breathing space, but like Isak said, who knows whether there's going to be local acceptance. And this is where the other Peter comes in. Cool.
Thanks, Pete. Cool. Right, I know everybody's pretty anxiously looking at their watches and thinking lunch is close. So let me go quickly. I think the important thing to understand here is that there are some quite critical steps between the idea, the conceptualization of a product, and actually getting uptake in the market. And so, as an engineer, I like to do things in a fairly structured way. So when we look at taking a product into the market, we look at very definitely that there are challenges that have to be identified, and definitely some clear strategies developed for each of the following. The first is the customer, the person who's actually going to be buying the thing, paying the money for it. The second is the user, and Peter mentioned earlier about the doctors and the resistance to change amongst medical personnel. And then ultimately the patient, you know, how's that going to then benefit the patient? And then finally, we also have to have an idea of what kind of volumes we're going to be producing, because that then defines how we actually set up the manufacturing process and so on. Let me just see where I am here. Okay. So you again can read a lot quicker than I can talk, but essentially we look at different channels and we create strategies for those channels. Broadly speaking, in the South African context, we look at a local market and we look at an export market. We then look at the local market and we segment that further into the state and the private market. And then we further segment that into the large private hospitals and the emerging groups. In the export market, we look at the legislative requirements in different countries, and that defines then the ease of entry into those markets. And the barriers to entry in those markets, because again, it's been mentioned a couple of times, legislation, getting CE mark, FDA approval and so on is very complicated, and it takes a lot of time, money and effort. And the logistics then of entry into those markets also has to be looked at. So having carried out the research, we then tailor the product offering and the specific unique features, which Peter mentioned some of those in the BeLife, to those particular customer groups, and we identified and to the identified needs. So again, you'll see that there's a reiterative process here. We look at it and we look at it again and we look at it again. And there is it might be that the buyer wants to look at just the capital cost or the total cost of ownership, and we have to actually find all of those things. There might be a need for ease of maintenance. We looked at some of the settings that we're looking at of point-of-care machines, and how easy are those things to maintain and support. And then again, we look at the channels which have got the potential for greatest growth, because that's ultimately what we're looking for. Okay, the competitive landscape, again, the product is entering a marketplace where there is an already established competitive landscape. So each channel identified will have probably a dominant competitor. And there needs to be an understanding of how this dominance came about and to tailor the offering that we have to show why we are different and better. So price is generally an issue with customers. So for example, the advantageous or the proof of advantageous total cost of ownership might be there, and we need to be able to overcome those sorts of objections. And there's also the issue of product support, and I've spoken a little bit about that before. Training, maintenance, replacement of consumables, Peter mentioned it too. It's often a problem in less developed countries. And then there's a fundamental requirement to identify unique needs and develop market strategies to hit those needs. So each segment will have legislative requirements. And again, I'm not going to go through this in much detail. You can read it, and the pack, I'm sure, is available on the website. So I want to get through a couple of things quickly here. So the specific needs of the customer. Okay, we need to define who the customer is and the personalization of the product to that purchase. So it's the people who actually do, or the institution that purchased the product, what are we going to do for them? Look at the price, the efficacy, safety, all of those kinds of things which have to come into it. And there is a mentality, and we've touched on it briefly with the other speakers, imported is best. For some reason, South African products are seen to be inferior. And that's a problem which one has to overcome. The user, obviously, the healthcare professional here, we're talking about life-changing, life-saving devices. So you can't afford to be too cavalier about what you put into the market. And there has to be a very, very keen attention to that. They need to be assured of the efficacy, the safety, the ease of use, and so on. And then the patient, obviously, they have very little say in the case of a BiPAP or a CPAP. They just need to know, and their families need to know that it's going to work. So comfort, reliability, and so on also needs to be critical. Then finally, in terms of determining the viability of this thing, the volume, the cost, and the price we need to establish. So clearly, any market endeavor needs to have a commercial justification. To make something simply for the sake of making it doesn't make sense. So that is needed, or needs to be founded on estimates of volume, the cost, and sustainable pricing. Manufacturing of medical devices requires specialized facilities and extensive quality management systems. Even though we made a CPAP device very, very quickly, the exhaustive process in terms of licensing, the quality management system that went into that, I can't tell you the sleepless nights that we had in trying to get all of that done quickly. And scale is very important in reducing cost. Obviously, if you've got a fixed cost, because you've got a sophisticated facility, the more stuff you push through it, the greater the dilution of the overhead is. So the better the cost benefit is. And then estimates are a best guess. Okay, and they need to be challenged. The assumptions made in regard to that, we spoke about assumptions earlier, we need to challenge those assumptions and make sure that the derivation of the estimates is extensively challenged. Okay, why do we need to do something about jobs in the sector? Guys, as an industrialist, and I've been an industrialist for many, many years, I am passionate about creating jobs, sustainable jobs. For one simple reason. Have a look at this. These are manufacturing jobs and manufacturing in this country as a percentage of GDP. In the 70s, it was around about 11%. It rose to about 25% by the early 90s. And we're back at about 13.8% of GDP at the moment. So from 1990 odd, we've exported jobs around the world. In the meantime, when you look around, there's a great Zulu expression which translated says, you don't sleep well when your neighbor is hungry. We've got lots of neighbors that are hungry. We need to address this. And innovation like we're seeing here is one of the ways that we can do that. So there's creativity, which is ab initio and new stuff, and innovation where we are improving on stuff. So what can we do in industry? And what did that whole CPAP project demonstrate to us? That we can collaborate quickly with each other, even though we might be competing in the marketplace, but by utilizing limited capacity and capability in the market space or in the manufacturing space, we can actually do things quickly. Information management plays an absolute key role in determining opportunities and managing activities across the supply chain. Peter actually also mentioned in that CPAP project, we had a group of people that were actually coordinating information across all of the different entities that were involved. 3D printing opens a whole world of possibilities. And even regulatory authorities can move quickly when they need it. Okay, so just why do I talk about job creation? Those are pictures from two of my factories. And you can see there are lots of people doing things which are productive and sustainable. And manufacturing medical devices actually lends itself, because of the complexity, to this kind of activity. So yes, robotics is a possibility, but that's high volume. Mostly medical devices are fairly low volume. So lots of people. Okay, the East has shown how people can collaborate across the supply chain and can build great strength and resilience. And I just have to look at an example quickly here. In the early 60s, the Japanese wanted to enter the South African market with motor cars. The first thing that they did was they created an organization called Motor Assemblies. And Motor Assemblies was created for one reason, to buy generic items. Spark plugs, tires, fan belts, things which people didn't know, whether they were in a Toyota or in a Suzuki or anything. But as a result, they were able to buy collectively and cheaply, and able then to get into the marketplace at a price which was competitive. So we need to find a way to align stakeholders to a common goal, and I'm saying that that common goal should be sustainable job creation. It's a tragedy that so many of our manufacturing capabilities and capacity has been exported, as I showed you in that graph, and we need to actually have a more conducive economy, because there are a lot more conducive economies out there than ours at the moment. It's just too difficult and unattractive in our legislative framework at the moment to create jobs in manufacturing. The labor legislation is onerous. Okay, I'm not going to be political here. It is difficult. Okay? Lack of adequate technical education. We don't have proper technicons. We don't have trade schools anymore in any great abundance. And if you look at the strong economies in the world, they are founded on people who work with their hands. Okay? It's all very well to have very brilliant people. We need those. But for every one brilliant person, we probably need 100 people who are going to make it happen. So that's what we need to do. And our weak currency also is, on the one hand, very advantageous, because if we export stuff, it's actually very advantageous. But when we're buying materials and components in from overseas, then it's a problem. And our currency is dependent largely on sentiment. So we've got to create a situation in our country where people are positive about things, because at the end of the day, currency is now, the value of the currency is dependent on that positive sentiment. So what do we need help with? We need tax breaks for investment. We need access for development capital. So why it's so important the Development Bank of South Africa is involved with this BIPAP development. We need capital to industrialize innovations. We need access to trade finance. Trade finance is where we have to pay for stuff up front and only get paid for it later. And we need proper evaluation of finance, of projects and monitoring of investments. There are any number of investments which DTI have made in the form of grants, the IDC have made in terms of loans, which have failed. Not because they are not good ideas, but because of poor execution. And we need to make sure that when we put these things into place, that we actually have people who can assist, mentor, monitor, and help these things get along. An education system, as I've spoken about earlier, that produces artisans and technically qualified people and other manufacturing aligned skills. We're producing far too many people out of our tertiary education system, which actually have very little relevance, I'm afraid to say. There was a tragedy I heard about a guy the other day, and the institution should remain nameless, but he was studying for a degree in library science. So I say to you, okay, it might have had relevance at some stage. Knowledge management, on the other hand, I think is a very, very definite need. But library science, I question. I have a niece who did an undergraduate degree in some esoteric thing and then was offered to do an honors in landscape architecture. She'd never actually seen a drawing in her life. So, surprise, surprise, after they took her 60-odd thousand rand to do the course, she failed. So, we need to have relevant education for what we need to build in this country. And a collaborative approach from Labour would be useful, and certainly preferential procurement. I'm not saying that we... And I'm kind of a bit on the fence around that, because I think that it is also inclined, if you have protective systems in place, that it tends to make you complacent and lazy. So, again, I see they've just duplicated the slide, so I can say then thank you. And if there are any questions, I think that we have overshot time a little bit. Okay.